Keisha speaks out about her life with the slain rapper. I sat down with Keisha and talked to her about the Tupac Shakur.
Keisha Morris had spent decades quietly carrying the memories of a love story that was as breathtaking as it was heartbreaking. But now she allegedly says, "I can't hide this any longer." Her voice, calm but firm, finally opens the door to the side of Tupac Shakur that the world rarely saw, a man who could be tender, vulnerable, and achingly human beneath the armor of his outlaw persona. Keisha met Tupac in 1994 when she was just a college student in New York, unaware that her life would be swept into the whirlwind orbit of one of hip-hop's most legendary and most misunderstood figures.
I married her for the wrong reasons.
What were the reasons?
I cared about her, but I married her because I was in jail, I was alone, I didn't want to be alone.
Their romance would carry them through courtroom battles, whispered promises, and even marriage behind prison walls. For Keisha, loving Tupac was both the best and hardest experience of her young life, and in finally exposing him, she humanizes a man the world thought it already knew. Let's go back to when they met. The spark, their early connection. When Keisha first met Tupac in the summer of 1994 at a New York nightclub, she didn't expect her life to change. She was a 20-year-old college student, practical and shy, with dreams of becoming a teacher. He was already a star, magnetic, controversial, and untouchable to most. Yet, in that crowded room, Tupac noticed her. Keisha would later recall that he wasn't arrogant or loud. Instead, he was disarmingly genuine, speaking to her as if she were the only person there. They exchanged a few words, and she walked away without giving much thought to the encounter, until a month later when he appeared again, determined to see her. Tupac's approach was surprisingly tender. He was persistent, but not forceful. When he asked her to visit his hotel room that night, she refused, choosing to keep her boundaries. Still, there was something about him that lingered in her mind, a charm that felt both thrilling and dangerous. "He made me feel like I mattered," she would later share. Their connection deepened quickly. Tupac wasn't just looking for a casual fling. He craved loyalty and stability in a life that constantly spiraled between fame and chaos. Only a few months later, he stunned Keisha by asking for her hand in marriage, not in a grand romantic gesture, but in an intimate, urgent conversation. "I don't want you calling yourself my girlfriend," he told her. "I want you to be my wife." By April 29, 1995, the two were married inside Clinton Correctional Facility, where Tupac was serving time on a controversial sexual abuse conviction. The setting was far from the fairy tale weddings Keisha had imagined as a young girl. There were no ball gowns or chandeliers, just gray walls, guards, and paperwork. Yet to her, it was real love. She dedicated herself to supporting him, visiting as often as she could, answering his calls, and helping manage his affairs on the outside. In those months, Tupac relied on her, confided in her, and revealed the man behind the fame that he rarely showed the world. He was funny, reflective, and deeply insecure about whether he would live long enough to see his dreams realized. Some days he spoke about building a quiet life after prison, maybe starting a family. Other days, he admitted he felt doomed, as if danger followed him everywhere. Keisha bore the weight of both his hope and his despair, feeling both cherished and overwhelmed. For a time, loving Tupac felt like living in a secret universe, one where he wasn't the fiery rapper on magazine covers, but simply a man longing for connection. Marriage during incarceration. When Tupac was finally released from Clinton Correctional Facility in October 1995, Keisha Morris believed their real life together was about to begin. For months, her world had revolved around steel gates, visitation schedules, and phone calls that ended with the hollow click of a prison line. She had imagined the day he would walk free as the start of something beautiful. Quiet nights in each other's arms, mornings full of laughter, maybe even conversations about the future they had whispered about during visiting hours. For a brief moment, that dream felt within reach. Keisha was there when he walked out, and he wrapped her in a hug that felt like it could last forever. Tupac whispered his gratitude, promising that he hadn't forgotten a single thing she had done for him while he was locked away. She had been his lifeline, the one who answered his calls when the world turned its back. To Keisha, those words meant everything. In that embrace, she felt loved, chosen, and irreplaceable. But the world outside prison walls had its own grip on Tupac. Freedom came like a tidal wave, loud, fast, and relentless. The moment he stepped back into society, he was no longer just a man. He was Tupac Shakur, the icon. There were reporters, photographers, studio sessions, and the business of catching up on lost time in the industry. Every record label wanted a piece of him. Friends, acquaintances, and new faces suddenly appeared in his orbit. Fame didn't pause for the tender, private reunion Keisha had envisioned. At first, she tried to adjust, convincing herself that things would settle down. She joined him when she could, attending events and watching from the sidelines as he dove back into the spotlight. In public, Tupac was electric, commanding rooms, joking with friends, and drawing attention wherever he went. But in those moments, Keisha sometimes felt invisible. The intimacy they had shared during his incarceration, when she had been his anchor, seemed to dissolve under the flashing lights and roaring crowds. Slowly, the emotional distance grew. Phone calls became shorter, replaced by long stretches of silence. Days would pass without the warmth of his voice or the reassurance of his presence. The man who had once leaned on her during his darkest days was now slipping away, caught in a life that left little space for the quiet love they had built. Keisha would later admit that this was when she began to feel used, not maliciously or intentionally, but in a heartbreakingly human way. During his imprisonment, she had been his source of strength, his emotional home. She managed his calls, offered him comfort, and gave him a reason to believe he wasn't alone in the world. But once he was free, it seemed like he no longer needed that stability. "I felt like I wasn't needed anymore," she would confess years later. It wasn't a good feeling. After everything, it was like, wow, it was over. Her pain was layered. She loved him deeply, and that love had pushed her to sacrifice so much: her time, her energy, and even moments of her own youth. She had built her life around his needs during the incarceration, and in return, she had received his trust, his private affection, and his promises. But freedom changed him, or maybe it simply revealed the other side of a life she had only glimpsed through letters and phone calls. In private moments, Keisha wrestled with conflicting emotions. On one hand, she wanted to hold on to the joy of what they had shared. On the other hand, she couldn't ignore the gnawing emptiness that came when days passed without hearing from him. She wondered if she had been a comfort for a season, a safe harbor during a storm he no longer felt threatened by. The thought hurt, but she didn't blame him completely. Fame was a beast that demanded everything, and Tupac was trying to survive in a world that wanted him to be everywhere at once. Yet even as the distance grew, there were small gestures that reminded Keisha she still mattered to him. Sometimes he would call her out of the blue, his voice soft and familiar, just to say he had been thinking of her. Other times, he would ask her to listen to a new song, hinting that its lyrics carried messages only she would truly understand. In those moments, the tenderness she had first fallen for flickered back to life. She could feel the man she had married, the man who had leaned on her, beneath all the chaos and bravado. Still, the emotional push and pull took its toll. Being with Tupac was, as Keisha would later admit, as good as it was bad. He had the power to make her feel like a queen, valued, adored, and protected. But he could also leave her feeling small and forgotten, standing in the shadow of a life too big for her to hold on to. Their love was real, but it was a love caught in the middle of fame, danger, and the ticking clock of destiny neither of them could control. And as Keisha exposed, she had a roller coaster of emotions, knowing that this would end in disaster. Annulment. Why it ended. By early 1996, Keisha Morris could feel the inevitable pulling at her heart. The love that had begun with whispered promises and stolen moments in prison visiting rooms was unraveling under the weight of freedom and fame. Tupac's world was spinning faster than ever. He had signed with Death Row Records, thrown himself back into music, and become entangled in the dangerous currents of Los Angeles rap scene. For Keisha, the quiet foundation they had built during his incarceration felt like it was being washed away. They were still married on paper, but in spirit, The distance was undeniable. Their conversations had grown strained, and the warmth that had once come naturally was replaced by awkward pauses and unspoken thoughts. Keisha had been his sanctuary in prison, but outside, in the world of the rich and famous where Tupac thrived, he rarely slowed down long enough to need one. She felt herself fading into the background, watching a man she loved drawn back into a world that devoured his time, energy, and attention. By the spring of 1996, less than a year after they had married in the gray halls of Clinton Correctional Facility, they made the difficult decision to annul the marriage. It wasn't a messy divorce, nor was it fueled by hatred or betrayal. Instead, it was a quiet acknowledgement of a painful truth. The love they shared could not survive in the life Tupac was living. For Keisha, signing the annulment papers was both heartbreaking and strangely relieving. It meant letting go of the illusion that they could return to the intimacy of their prison-bound love. "I felt like I had done everything I could," she would later reflect. "We were both young, and our lives were moving in different directions." Even though it was her choice, the annulment came with an ache that lingered for years. Keisha had loved Tupac deeply, and she had believed in the world they could have built together. But love alone wasn't enough to overcome the pressures surrounding him. Pressures of fame, loyalty, and survival in a world that was often ruthless. Their love story, which had burned so brightly, had been consumed by the very life that made him extraordinary. And yet, even as a free man, Tupac never fully let go of Keisha. The two continued to speak, though less often than before. Sometimes he would leave her messages, his voice tinged with a mix of affection and apology. He would ask her to listen to a song or remind her of something they had shared in quieter days. It was his way of saying that, no matter the distance, she still held a part of his heart. For Keisha, these moments were bittersweet. They reminded her of the man she had married, the one who had laughed with her in visiting rooms, the one who had confided his fears and hopes. But they also reminded her of the life they never fully had, the mornings they never spent together, and the family they once dreamed of starting. Looking back, Keisha often described her time with Tupac as good as it was bad. He could make her feel like the most important woman in the world, and yet, in the next moment, she could feel like she was standing on the outside of his life. She had loved him like a young woman in love does, with hope, trust, and complete surrender. But love in Tupac's world was rarely simple, and the marriage had been a beautiful, fleeting chapter rather than a lifelong story. The annulment, while heartbreaking, didn't erase the love. If anything, it allowed Keisha to hold on to the best parts of what they had without the constant sting of unmet expectations. She never spoke of bitterness, only understanding. She had entered his life during a storm, and she had given him everything she could, knowing deep down that he carried battles no one could truly fight for him. When Tupac was killed in September 1996, just months after the annulment, the loss hit Keisha with a profound finality. Her main regret, as she has shared in rare interviews, wasn't that the marriage ended. It was that she hadn't spent more time with him while he was alive. If she had known his life would be so short, she would have cherished every moment, even the hard ones. "I can't hide this any longer," she allegedly said, when finally speaking about their story. "I never regretted any of it. I was young, I was in love, and he treated me like a king in his own way. My only regret is that I didn't hold on to him a little more, because I never thought he would be gone so soon." Keisha's love for Tupac, though brief and complicated, remains one of the most humanizing chapters of his life. In a world that often painted him as an untouchable, defiant figure, her story reveals the vulnerable, loving man behind the legend. A man who craved connection, feared loss, and, for a fleeting moment, found home in her heart. Keisha's revelations, humanizing Tupac. To the world, Tupac Shakur was larger than life. He was the rebellious face of West Coast rap, the outspoken critic of injustice, and the magnetic star who seemed to court controversy with every move. In interviews and headlines, he was often portrayed as brash, arrogant, and dangerous, a man who lived for the spotlight and thrived on conflict. His tattoos, his swagger, and his fiery words fed the image of a rap outlaw. Fans idolized him for his defiance, while critics dismissed him as volatile. This was the Tupac the world thought it knew, a myth built on anger, brilliance, and tragedy. But Keisha Morris knew a completely different man, a man the public rarely glimpsed. And this is the man that Keisha decided to expose for who he truly was. Behind closed doors, Tupac was tender, playful, and sometimes shy. He loved the simple pleasures of life, the kind of things that never made it into headlines. He enjoyed cooking, and one of his favorite ways to relax was preparing meals, taking pride in feeding the people he loved. There was a gentleness in the way he approached those moments, a sharp contrast to the fiery persona he carried in public. Keisha remembers little things that made him human, like his fascination with pomegranates. He loved breaking them open and sharing the seeds, laughing at the mess they made. It was a quiet joy, one that had nothing to do with fame or bravado, and everything to do with being present and alive. In those moments, he wasn't the untouchable rap star. He was just a young man finding happiness in something sweet and ordinary. He also loved giving gifts, a habit that Keisha says came from a place of genuine thoughtfulness rather than showmanship. Tupac delighted in surprising her with small, meaningful presents, books he thought she would love, trinkets that reminded him of her, or even handwritten notes that carried his private humor and affection. He noticed things about people, and he wanted them to feel seen, even if the world believed he was too self-absorbed to care. These intimate glimpses of Tupac's life revealed the tragedy of his public image. Fame had stripped him of the right to be fully human. The media painted him as a caricature, angry, reckless, untouchable, because vulnerability didn't fit the story. His laughter in the kitchen, his love of pomegranates, his habit of giving thoughtful gifts, none of that made the news. But to Keisha, those were the moments that defined him, the ones she carried in her heart long after their marriage ended. Keisha's memories remind us that Tupac Shakur wasn't just the poet, the rebel, or the headline. He was a man capable of great tenderness, humor, and generosity. A man who could love deeply, even if the world never saw it. And in loving him, Keisha witnessed the quiet humanity the world had dehumanized, the side of Tupac that could never be captured in a photograph or a rhyme. Keisha's perspective today: no regrets. In the years since Tupac's death, Keisha Morris has carried her memories like fragile treasures, each one a reminder of a love that was as fleeting as it was profound. She rarely speaks publicly about their time together, choosing to guard the private moments that belong to them alone. But when she does, her words reveal a story far richer than the headlines ever allowed. A story of a young woman who fell in love with a man the world thought it already knew, only to discover that the truth lived in the quiet spaces no one else could see. A woman who has exposed Tupac to the world in a way no one thought possible. Keisha has said she never regretted marrying Tupac, even though their union lasted only 10 months and ended in annulment. She was barely out of her teens, swept into the life of a man who was fighting battles on every front: legal troubles, fame's crushing expectations, and the ever-present shadow of danger. She knew from the very beginning that loving him wouldn't be easy. Yet, for all the tears, the sleepless nights, and the heartache of feeling both loved and left behind, she wouldn't change a thing. Even after the annulment, they never fully severed their bond. Keisha still heard from him, through phone calls and messages that carried a weight she only fully understood after his death. Time has given Keisha perspective, but it has not erased the bittersweet ache of what was lost. She now understands that Tupac's life was lived in extremes: love and pain, fame and danger, tenderness and chaos. Being with him meant living in those extremes too, and while it left scars, it also gave her memories she will never trade for anything. Her story humanizes Tupac, showing the world that behind the brash, defiant artist was a young man who longed for love, family, and moments of ordinary peace. Moving on past the pain and grief. Today, Keisha Morris lives a life far removed from the chaos and fame that once defined her time with Tupac Shakur. But the quiet life she leads has exposed a side of the rap icon that the world rarely saw. After their whirlwind marriage and heartbreaking annulment, she chose a path of purpose over publicity, dedicating herself to education, advocacy, and family. She earned a degree in criminal justice from John Jay College and later pursued a master's in education, using her knowledge to mentor and uplift young people in her community. Her work in youth advocacy and education has exposed the values Tupac held closest to his heart, values that were often overshadowed by headlines about violence and controversy. Through mentoring, community engagement, and projects that celebrate Black heritage, Keisha carries forward the side of Tupac that dreamed of change and empowerment. She has also contributed to children's literature, supporting stories that inspire pride, resilience, and hope. While the world remembers Tupac for his music, defiance, and tragedy, Keisha has exposed the private man who hummed in the kitchen, gave thoughtful gifts, and longed for peace. Today, she is a devoted mother of two, keeping her family life out of the spotlight while quietly protecting the memories that shaped her. Keisha Morris may have stepped away from fame, but in doing so she has revealed the truth of her love story, one that reveals a softer, more human Tupac Shakur, and a woman who turned heartbreak into purpose. Her life now stands as a testament to both resilience and love, offering a rare window into the man behind the legend. In the end, Keisha's reflections are not about scandal or blame, but about love in its rawest form, beautiful, messy, fleeting, and unforgettable. She carries no bitterness, only a quiet understanding of the man she once called her husband and the life they almost had together. Her voice, steady and tender, reminds us that even legends are human, and even the strongest love stories can end in heartbreak. As she shares her truth, one can't help but wonder, if you knew the person you loved might be gone tomorrow, would you love them any differently today? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one.